so thanks for coming. Just a couple introductions. I'm Ryan Rochus, so I'm the academic dean. I also teach geometry. And then
I'm Lorna Kapanke, and I'm the Learning Resource Center Coordinator, and then I teach our reading intervention course here at St. Croix.
So we're going to talk a little bit about how to be successful at St. Croix, just school in general too. But the format we're going to follow today is we're going to list some obstacles that Lorna and I have come up with. We got about 8 of them. And then what structures we have at school that can help those, and then what can you do to help support that. So the first one we're going to talk about is mindset. You may have heard of that growth mindset versus fixed mindset type of deal, where you've got a fixed mindset where that's typically where people think, I've got a certain amount of talent and ability that was given to me and that's the way it's going to be. You might hear people say, well, I'm no good at math. I wasn't gifted at math, or my parents were bad, so it must be hereditary and I can't be good at it either. The other side of it's also true where people say, well, I'm smart. I was smart in kindergarten and I'm going to be smart all the way through. So that would be on the fixed side. The growth side basically says, all right, I've got a certain amount of ability that the Lord has blessed me with, but I can cultivate that and make it better. Naturally, we want to, in school, tend toward the growth side. But you can pick up some fixed mindset things from your children when you hear things like, or if you see them, avoid challenges. People who have a fixed mindset avoid challenges because that's a hit to their ego. I don't want to try something hard because I've been told I was smart, and if I don't do well in this, that's going to change what my parents or what people think of me. So you'll hear things like that. We do want students to be more accepting of challenges, and so some of the things that we have at school naturally is, you know, what's our philosophy behind learning? Naturally, we want it to be that they're going to improve. We're going to teach them things that they've never been taught before, so naturally it's not going to be easy the first time they do it, so they have to be able to embrace those challenges. As teachers and as educators, that's the whole point, is to try to build brain connections, and the only time those brain connections get built is if you're doing something you haven't done before. So we want students to be comfortable with not being successful the first time, and so it's really important that we have an atmosphere that provides that. With the curriculum, the same thing is true. So the overall purpose of a high school curriculum is for them to get a well-rounded education. We're not looking for specialization at a high school level. Some students think, well, you don't have criminology and I want to be a criminologist. Well, that's for later. Right now, with the way the state has their graduation requirements, it's so that they get a well-rounded, so they keep as many doors open as possible for adulthood, which is why there's fine arts, there's music, there's the math, the English and the science and the social studies, the whole thing. So that means that students sometimes aren't going to be great at one of those areas because not everybody's gifted with everything. So then that's the time for parents, teachers, the school to say, okay, if this is a struggle for you, then how do we push forward and we push through that? So that's another part of being growth-minded, where you can always improve and we're going to tackle it as it comes. In our classes also, we want students to understand that the teacher's role in that is that they're trying to figure out, and I joke with the kids that they're trying to figure out what's wrong with them. Kind of like a physician does when you go to the doctor, trying to figure out what they're good at, what they're struggling at, and so that we can fix and reduce that gap. So it's really important for students not to get to the point where they are freaking out like, oh, I have a quiz or I have a test today, because really that's just another opportunity for them to communicate to the teacher what they're struggling with or what they're good at, because they don't always like to raise their hands and just volunteer that information. The course selection piece, naturally we have a lot of curriculum that's built to build upon itself so that they can challenge themselves. We see a little bit of a mindset issue when students select courses. Sometimes they just say, I need to get an easy course so I can up my GPA. Naturally, that's not what we want. We want students to challenge themselves. So we want it to be an appropriate challenge, but yet have it be challenging. So there are courses that are lined up with certain prerequisites so that they can have an appropriate level of challenge with each of those. And then their advisors help them with that course selection to make sure that they're finding something that fits them. We don't want it to be too easy because that doesn't promote growth. We also don't want it to be too hard because that doesn't help growth either. So what can you do to help? Focus on the learning process, both academic and personal. So on the academic side, ask your student, what have you learned today? How did it go? How did you push through any challenges or struggles you had? And even on the personal side, as they struggle with things that might be social or athletic or something else, help them with that process. And focus on the process, not necessarily the output. So you see I have on there, de-emphasize grades and GPA. I see this a lot in class where students kind of freak out about, my grades are down, my grades are down. I'm like, well, why are you stressing about your grades? Just worry about the learning. Like, my parents are stressing me out about the grades. The parents are, you gotta have a certain GPA to get into a certain college, so you have a certain job, so you can have a certain life, and you can be happy. It doesn't quite go that way. So if we focus on the output, like the grades or the GPA, we lose sight of the process part, and the process part is really the most important. Ultimately, we don't want any student to go through school and have it be a smooth road, because if their life is smooth at this age, life's gonna really hit them in the face when they're an adult. So we'd rather have them go through some struggles and meet some adversity and some difficulty now while they're still under ours and your care, so that we can coach and guide them through it, versus having a smooth road now and then never having faced any adversity and how to deal with that. We see that in certain classes too, where all of a sudden there's a wall. I'm a math teacher, we see that in math a lot, where kids cruise along in math for a while and then they hit a certain point, whether it's algebra, pre-calculus, or even beyond in college, where there's always gonna be that wall that comes. Then what do they do when they hit that wall? Do they give up? Oh, now I'm not smart anymore, because they've been told they were smart the whole time. But we want them to be able to push through. So also support the growth through the challenge. So when you have your student going through something, it's okay and that's good. And we're hoping that that happens. We want the stress to come from doing the academic work, not from the outside source of, you've got to get this certain GPA, because that's not the right type of stress. We want the stress of the rigor of doing the academic work versus, stress of what the output is. And then that's what builds resiliency, and that's really what we want in our young people. We often hear from employers what they want from students, and it's not necessarily the academic things. It's, can they learn and can they be resilient and push through adversity? That's really what employers and people in our society want. So that's that one. I think the next one is learning.
All right, so the next obstacle that we identified was that of poor sleep and poor nutrition. I think this one is very obvious, but since we see it in a very real way in our classrooms and hallways, we felt like we'd be remiss not to at least mention it. I'm sure that you connected with Maslow's hierarchy of needs over the years, maybe in a high school psychology class or a college psychology class. It's generally thought to still be pretty accurate, so it's good to review it. So we see that sleep and nutrition comes in at the bottom there under those physiological needs, and then everything else builds up from there. Safety, belonging, esteem, and then self-actualization. Some people would argue that the love and belonging one should be a little bit lower. It's kind of an interesting thought, but I know that as both a teacher and a parent, I often find myself either coaching or guiding kids, and I tend to be coming from the perspective of maybe like the top two, where it doesn't take long to figure out that we've really got a problem with a sleep or nutrition issue. So I think it's just good just to remind ourselves that we just got to be on the lookout for that with all of our kids, because it certainly has a big impact on their learning in all kinds of different ways, mood and energy level and resiliency. Just a lighthearted example, working with a middle schooler last week, we were doing some really tough math, and he knew that I needed him to focus, and he looked me right in the eye and said, I really want to talk about pizza. And it was just a reminder that that's where his brain was at the moment, okay? It was way down at the bottom there. So just a reminder that we've got to, build up from the bottom. As far as how we can help at home, just the importance of awareness and education, and that looks different in everybody's house, but just continuously providing kids with information. And I find that kids are good about understanding things, but they sometimes have a hard time connecting the dots. So they often are very wise about themselves, but always not connecting the dots. And I think that's true for sleep, and it's true for nutrition as well. So even though it's a very basic need, sometimes we just need to spend a few minutes thinking about how we can improve that. Never underestimate the value of blocker snacks. It's a way to make for a good day. So there you go.
Other than the monster.
Other than the monster, yes. Just as a side note, the monster drinks and the energy drinks that we're seeing a lot of. I know, I happened to take a loved one to the cardiologist this last summer, and she noted that the number one reason she's seeing young people in her office is because of monster drinks and energy drinks. So just a thought that you can do some more research on your own if you want to.
The next one that we came up with was attendance naturally being at school helps, since this is where everything is happening. So what our attendance policy is that students shouldn't miss more than 10 classes per class, otherwise they lose credit. Now there's some exceptions to that, especially last year with COVID. That was kind of thrown out the window. Even this year with some sicknesses, that happens from time to time. So we do have exceptions to that policy, and then Mr. Wine, who's the Dean of Students, would inform you of that. But ultimately, we want kids in class as much as humanly possible, so that way we can respond to what their needs are. When students are gone, though, we do have some resources. The Google Classroom is a great place for them to get information when they have been absent. And as a parent, you don't have access to that directly, but you can certainly sit there and tell your student, hey, log into your Google Classroom account, show me what's on there. Let's see what happened if you missed, especially if you've got multiple days in a row. A lot of teachers post notes and assignments on there. Another resource is Plan Book, which is what the teacher's plans are for the week. So you can see some things there. As far as how you can help as a parent, remember that missed school equals missed learning. Sometimes parents get in their mind that, well, we can take a lot of time off and you just make up all the worksheets and the assignments and everything's okay. In some classes that may work a little bit better than others. In some classes, if you miss one day, it's really tough and it's stressful for the students to make that up. I'm thinking like math classes where it's a new skill every day, or at least progression of a skill, foreign language, those. So missing school also means that you're missing the opportunity for the teacher to respond to their questions and their needs, and it makes it harder for them to recover. Because then they've got to jump back in wherever the rest of the class is, make up what was from behind, and then try to get up to speed. Not that it can't be done, it's just not easy. So we ask that you ensure that your students in school as much as possible, and then try to avoid scheduling vacations during school days. We know that family situations happen and not everybody's on the school schedule and can take summer vacations. We understand that. But sometimes things aren't absolutely necessary, and especially you have to read your student. If they struggle already, taking them out makes it even more of a struggle for them.
All right, so the next obstacle we identified was that of like time management and organization. Certainly some kids really struggle with success with that. So for those people who might be really adept at time management and organization, they're rather shocked that that's a struggle for some, but the fact is that a lot of kids have to be explicitly taught how to manage those things. Most kids have a study hall baked into their schedule, and it's fair to say that most students don't always use it as wisely as they could, which as adults we can often say that too. But the focus should really be on instilling those daily habits that make the biggest difference. And the most valuable tools for that would be the school planner. In Google Classroom, there's a calendar and a to-do list, and then all the teachers post their plan book. As an example, the Google Classroom calendar, as you're looking at it, it either says calendar or to do. When we had distance learning, like way back in 2020, I was really shocked at how many students did not utilize that very basic resource. And it was so obvious because they would pull it up on their screen, I would be looking right at their faces. And then when I would say, please look at your to-do list in Google Classroom, and they would click on it and they'd be like that, they never knew that existed before. So it's fair to, you know, really just go over the basics and make sure they know those basic resources. So as far as study hall is concerned, if you can instill in your kids how it can be best utilized. If I had a magic wand, I would say in that first 5 minutes, we're checking Google Classroom, we're checking plan book links, we're filling out our planner, and then it is really important that kids manage any missing assessments, because that's really the only place they can typically take it is in their study hall. And then encouraging them to do some really intense focus and then get some downtime. One strategy we have a lot of success with is like the Pomodoro method, where you set your little tomato timer for however many minutes and you just work like your hair is on fire for that amount of time, and then you take a true break after that, and kids respond well to that. So just encourage, if your student is struggling, just having some honest conversations about how they're using that study time as a resource. As far as what parents can do at home, one of the toughest parts about having teenagers is we can't micromanage them. It doesn't work, it's not successful, but we certainly can hold them accountable. And a really successful, just very basic question that I say probably 5 times a day is, would you like me to hold you accountable, and how and when? And kids respond really well to that because they feel like it's in their own voice in terms of that accountability piece. If they tell you that you don't want you to hold them accountable, then you might have to phrase that as a statement, like, I am gonna hold you accountable when and how. And then, set your timer, and that way they know they're not getting that voice in their head all the time. They just know it's coming at Tuesday at 3 o'clock because that's what you agreed to. And they appreciate having that voice.
Can I add one thing to that?
Sure.
So with the accountability piece, sometimes it's good for you to take a step back and let them take your hand off the bike seat and let them balance and follow. And that was before us. None of us would make any mistakes. We usually have to make some on our own. So there's that fine line between knowing how much to push and then saying, okay, I'm gonna let you feel the consequence of this a little bit so that you realize, okay, I do need to use my study hall a little bit more wisely.
And we want them to make those mistakes in this loving environment as opposed to maybe a college environment where you're more of a number and the care just isn't there.
And then one more, sorry.
Yeah.
The myth of the multitasking that they think that they can do, where they can have 15 tabs open and answer social media posts and listen to music and sing along and focus. The brain isn't wired to do that. It's task switching, and every time you switch a task, you're less effective. So I preach it. They don't listen to me on that all the time, even my own kids, but I keep going back at it, like just one thing at a time. And I like the timer thing is great, where you just say, everything's not gonna distract me for this amount of time. And then, okay, then now I can check my social media, I can check my email, but.
I'm not too proud to admit that there's a group of adults on staff who use the Pomodoro technique, and we actually have Post-it notes so that when we're in session, whatever that is, like 28 minutes or whatever, we have to put a Post-it note right over here, that this is the one task that I am diving deep into and finishing during this time, and then we hold each other accountable. That's mostly during the summer, and I'm not sure if I'm super proud of that, but that's okay. It works. Okay, the next one, social emotional state of students. So obviously the mental health needs of our teens in general is a big deal, and it's certainly sure to impact academics. It's no secret that teens have really been struggling with social emotional needs recently. Prior to COVID, those needs were escalating, and COVID has only kind of poured gasoline on that in many ways. So this is not to tell you that kids are struggling, because I know you see it all around you. But we really want you to be aware of what resources are available, okay? So the first one that we're taking very seriously, we take seriously, is the advisory system. So every student has an advisor, 6 through 12, and while that advisor is certainly responsible for doing academic advising, it is the relationship between the student and their advisor that can really be an important piece of monitoring social emotional needs while at school. So if your student is struggling, that advisor touch point is really important in terms of communication. And then I'd be remiss too if I didn't mention our pastors on staff in this section. They're all trained counselors and are there to guide from a Christian viewpoint. And then the last one that I just have such a deep appreciation for, just because I'm in my 10th year now, and the counseling services on campus have just grown hugely from almost nothing to a really good spot. So I just want to make sure, it makes me sad when I find out that parents don't know about it. So the counseling service is available, and it's really quite easy to access. So it's Christian Family Solutions, a variety of counselors. So they're basically on campus every day except for Tuesdays. They meet very discreetly throughout the week. Each student has access to 3 free visits. And then from there, insurance typically kicks in. In order to access that piece, Pastor Huebner, Dave Huebner, is your touch point. So he connects you with Christian Family Solutions to do an intake and get you scheduled. So then kids are typically scheduled within the school day, which is very, logistically helpful. You don't need to run somewhere after school, that type of thing. So we have a great deal of students making use of that resource. The new thing on campus this year that we want people to be really aware of is we now have the walk-in counselor available, and that's on Wednesdays. And we really hope that kids start to see that as more and more of a resource. I know we can't always plan for tough days, but we're happy to know that on that one day it's walk-in. And in that case, you don't have to go through Pastor Huebner, it's just available. And then as far as what you can do to help, just that communication piece, just really encourage you to reach out to the advisor, Pastor Huebner, with concerns. That school-home relationship can be really important when mental health concerns are present. I know there have been many times where, I said, I wish we knew a little bit more about that so we could have helped more at school. So just keeping that in mind.
So this one might look kind of weird to put up there with students this age of lack of technology use as an obstacle, but it really is the case. And I don't want to say it's inappropriate technology use, but it's the not using the productive technology that they need at school. So the things that we offer is, we're a Google school, so they have email, chat, Google Classroom. We use those very heavily. And we expect the students to check their email every day. That's where all the daily announcements come from. So that way they can find out what's being offered, what groups are meeting, those sorts of things. Google Chat is basically a texting or a messaging piece of the Google. We ask that the students use that. Also, sometimes they don't want to, at least I found in my experience, they don't send emails to communicate, but they will send you a chat message. So we ask, hey, if you've got a question of a teacher, send a chat message. So they're coming in all the time, so it's a great way for them to talk with the teacher and ask for help quick, or, hey, are you free? Can I meet with you? Whatever it might be. And then Google Classroom is a great tool that has a lot of different things on it that teachers use in a variety of different ways, so we ask that they use that too. Power School, the student information system, hopefully you're aware of that, but the students also have a login that's separate from the parents. And if your student is using your account, I would ask you to get a hold of Mr. Tess and have them use their own, because when it comes time to course scheduling, they can't use the parent account to actually sign up for classes. They have to use their own, so they should get used to that. And then they can check on, their missing work, what they've got, how they're doing in their classes. And then Grammarly, this one's promoted in the building, but I'm not sure parents understand it, but we have a Grammarly education subscription. So every student has this program where they can put their writing into it, and it's a plagiarism checker. It it's just awesome to help them improve their writing. I use it all the time as a teacher when I'm about to send an email and I pick up all my typos. So we really want the students to do that, especially anytime they're doing any writing. They can really improve their writing using that tool, and it gives them great suggestions. So those are the things that we would hope that they would use that we provide. Yes, they know their way around certain technologies, but these are the ones they really need to be able to do to be productive at school. So as a parent, what can you do? If they've got a smartphone, have them install all these apps on there. Google has apps for the email, the chat, the classroom, everything Google offers naturally. You can install PowerSchool on there. Even a Grammarly keyboard for your texting on your phone is available. And then monitor and encourage their usage. By monitor, I don't mean that you're over their shoulder, making sure they're not doing what they're not supposed to do, but you can do that. But say, hey, open up your inbox, let me see how many unread emails you have right now. And if it's more than one or two, they probably should take care of that. Sometimes when I have students do that, they've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of unread emails. Well, how do you know what's going on? And they don't. That's the problem. So if you could do that, that would be also helpful.
Can I put another quick plug in for Grammarly? So the kids have the subscription to Grammarly Premium. So there's a tremendous amount of software out there that will show you if you're writing incorrectly. But the stress with Grammarly is to improve your writing. So it's looking at all the the technical stuff, but it's also looking at word choice, parallelism, active passive voice, just all these really great things that get kids thinking about the quality of their writing, the tone of their writing. So it's not just is it correct or not correct. So that's what Premium offers that like the free Grammarly doesn't. It's really a great tool.
And I'll go off that a little bit more too. I'm convinced that there's never been a generation that it's more important for students to know how to write. If you think about most of their communication, it's written. When I look at my kids' phones, the only phone calls that are on those phones are incoming from my wife or me. They're not actually talking to anybody with those phones. So their ability to communicate clearly, choose the right words so that they don't say something that gets taken in the wrong context is really important. So the better they can get at writing, the more effective they're going to be as adults. Another obstacle is missing assignments. I've often said that there's two really easy, well, I shouldn't say easy. There are two surefire ways to make sure you get through high school. That's if you show up and if you do your work. If you do those two things, you're going to make it through high school without a whole lot of scratches. So the missing assignment piece is important. So we have a policy on that, and it's kind of twofold. Number one, when students are current, their learning just is 100% better when they're current. If they get behind, they don't know what's going on, then that stress builds up and then they don't perform well, and that's just not an optimal way to learn. The other thing with missing assignments is to help them with the responsibility piece of just being faithful to their work. And ultimately we want students and adults who are faithful to all parts of their life, but to their work especially in this case. So our policy is that if students have more than 6 missing assignments on a weekly basis, then they have the consequence of an academic detention, which is lovingly called shindig. And students actually came up with that name, I think, if I remember right. I remember I said, yeah, we're gonna have a shindig, and they're like, what's a shindig? So then it just kind of became the name of this whole thing. But and it's kind of lighthearted like that. We take it serious, like they have to show up, but then it's, okay, how can we help you get this done? Let's get you back on track as soon as we can possibly do that so that your learning can continue most productively. Another way is that if anything over 2 weeks old is still hanging out there, we say, okay, you gotta get this taken care of. I typically send email warnings to students if they've got some things behind, but ultimately we want them checking PowerSchool, and their teachers also remind them to get certain things done. So their ability to access PowerSchool is really important. That way they can keep up on stuff, and then also in Google Classroom, that helps them. And then the idea with that is that we get them caught up as soon as possible, and then they're free to go. We're not looking at this as a punishment. It's more of, okay, something's not working with your current time schedule. Let's take some time out after school for an hour, get you caught up as soon as possible, and then we can move forward. From a parent standpoint, the PowerSchool app for your phone is just phenomenal. You can check it real quick. You don't have to log in every time. Most people forget their logins. So if you've got it installed on your phone, then you don't have to log in every time, and you can see where your students are at with their assignments. And then awareness of the consequences. And I mean that in two different ways. One, naturally the shindig consequence, but two, when they're missing assignments, they're missing learning also, and it's just gonna get harder and harder for them to stay current. So the more they can stay current, the better off it is for their overall learning.
All right, I think the last obstacle we had, I wouldn't consider that an obstacle, but the last point we had was learning support. So if any student needs support, we want to make sure that you're aware of the resources that we have. So the first would be peer tutoring programs. So this would be available to any students, really for any course that's taught under this roof. Obviously not PSEO or dual credit, that kind of thing, but any course that's taught underneath this roof. We have a lot of student volunteers who are happy to serve as a volunteer tutor. We usually choose kids who are in that same class, so it's very efficient. We're not trying to decipher, teaching style and expectations. So if a student is in need of a peer tutor, it would be a matter of reaching out to the teacher and then determining if that was a good fit and then working with me. So typically what we do, like let's say somebody needs a tutor in pre-calculus. They would work with the teacher in conjunction with me. We would find a good fit, and then we would schedule it like 2 times a week for like 6 weeks, and then reevaluate after that 6 weeks. And obviously it's a volunteer thing. Kids either meet right before school or right after school. Sometimes we can make it work during study hall, and of course sometimes in the dorms we can make it work as well. So I want you to see both sides of that. Could your child maybe benefit from a tutor, but also could your child maybe benefit from being a tutor? If they're in that class, they are obviously going to be more solid with the content if they're also teaching it to a peer, helping a peer understand it. So I want you to keep that in mind. So the first step in that case would be contacting the teacher and working from there. All right, and then we have the LRC, stands for Learning Resource Center. It boils down to support services for students with disabilities or students who are at risk academically. And even if this doesn't apply to your student, it's good that you know that St. Croix offers this so that perhaps you can, if it comes up in conversation with somebody else. So it is a supported study hall throughout the day, smaller study hall, more direct support, in which we engage in a lot of academic and organizational coaching, a lot of progress monitoring, a lot of relationship building, because that's really a big thing with learning and academics. We do handle accommodations, so if a student were to need either testing accommodations here, which would then even apply to ACT or SAT, I set those up based on the information that we're given. And then in those cases where a student is receiving special education services from the district, the LRC manages that as well. So as far as how parents can help with that, if you have a student who you think would benefit from either that peer tutoring scenario or the LRC, communicate your concerns to the advisor, classroom teachers, and of course myself as well. Okay? All right, I think those were the obstacles that we came up with and the resources.
Yeah, and the last thing I just wanted to go through was who to contact if you have some questions about certain things. So attendances, our Dean of Students, Mr. Wine. And then if you have specific questions about something going on in class, the teacher of the course is the first one. Oh, I forgot the overview. So the advisor is kind of your one-stop shop for everything. They should have a good overview of everything that's going on with your student. It could be relationships, what's going on athletically or in fine arts or academics. They meet with your student often, and they're in their class every day during advisory. So throughout their career at St. Croix, they're going to be the ones that know your student the best. The teachers will have them for a year, but then they'll move on, and so they may lose that connection, but the advisor always has the connection. So they're always great for you to talk to. If it's general academic stuff, that falls under me. If you need some learning support, Mrs. Kopenke, and then the counseling is Pastor. So, that's what we've got for you. Do we have any questions? Yeah.
Parent-teacher conferences coming up. Do you recommend that we meet with our child's advisor?
The question, you want me to repeat the question? So the question was, with parent-teacher conferences, should you meet with the child's advisor? I think that'd be healthy, yes. As a parent to make that connection with the advisor, that'd be a good idea.
I think so too.
I had a question regarding attendance. I guess it's more specific to, I know my child can handle the Google Classroom and communicate. I'm not for sure what's expected in terms of if they're ill, they miss they've had a fever, or they're gonna be out for a couple of days. I'm assuming they communicate with the teacher. If there needs to be a test or something that needs to be made up, which I didn't even think of until it was brought up there, and my child doesn't have a study hall, when is that expected to be made up, or how? And I think that would probably work out my student with the teacher, but I'm just thinking from my own perspective, might help alleviate some of the stress at home with that when it happens the first time, like, okay, how do we handle it? And so, I guess that's a question that I have.
I don't think I
Good
can
question.
repeat all that.
How does
So,
the student make up,
yeah, so if you're absent, how do you make things up?
especially if you don't have a study hall?
Especially if you don't have a
Yeah.
study hall. So the default is during study hall, there's a whole system in the study hall for teachers to put things in that students haven't taken. If they're absent, it also goes in there, but then, so either before school or after school, or even maybe during the lunch period, could work out that way. If it's a struggle, the teacher will definitely work with the student to figure it out. We don't have a hard and fast rule by saying, okay, if you're absent one day, you have to make everything up in 2 days or something like that. The rule of thumb is that the teacher works with the student to figure out an appropriate time frame to get that done. Some of that might be able to actually not have to be done at school even, depending on what it is. Or if it's a more lengthy absence, I know that some teachers will excuse it and just say, okay, you're not gonna have to do everything, let's just pick these certain things and then make those up. But ultimately, we wanna make sure that you as parents know that if your student's sick, let them rest and be home. Don't have them try to do homework when they're home sick. Let's get them back into school as quick as possible and not have it drag out. But
Yeah, for some students who are, I guess, literally want to stay on top of their homework.
yeah,
And you might have, like I have one of those, and it's hard when they don't know what the expectation is to rest because they don't know what's gonna be expected when they go back, and like there's that stress. So I think that's why I present the question, like, okay, now I can say, hey, this is how they said to handle it, and just rest, get better, it'll be handled when you get back. But, I think.
same thing would be true as if you have a pre-planned absence like a vacation. Some students will say, well, can I get all my homework and take it on vacation? Like, you're not gonna do the homework on vacation. So just go enjoy your vacation, come back, and we'll work it out when we're done. And if they are stressed, you can just say, well, hey, Rachi said you don't have to stress out, you can sit here and just recover, so.
Well, and this might be a little non sequitur, but the reason for shindig, as we call it, or academic detention, I mean, some of the kids, well, most of the kids come and see that almost like a punishment, and that's really not how we view it. It's, we're concerned about you, we love you, we don't want you to fall any more behind, so we're gonna have you stay after school and get this done. So, just keeping in mind too, that if the student does miss a lot of days for whatever reason, and they do find themselves in academic detention, framing that as a positive thing rather than a negative thing would be helpful. So. Any other questions?
Nothing online.
Okay.
Okay, well,
Cool. Thank you so
wrap it
much.
up, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you all for coming. There are others coming up, like we have another session on counseling specifically, and those resources that are available. You get to meet some of the counselors, get to talk with Pastor Huebner a little bit, for instance. But invite your parent, guardian friends along. Love to have them.
and if you're scared to ask questions in front of this big group and you think of it later, you can always email either one of us and we'll get back with you.
It's an intimidating crowd. All right, thank you.